Simon says subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications.
Let me introduce you to today's excellent instructor, Dave Casuto. Dave has 2 master's degrees, one in instructional technologies and organizational psychology. He's actually trained countless learners face-to-face, but also many others from his online courses. In fact, he's probably trained millions of students and learners worldwide from his online courses. And he's actually created a significant numbers for Simon Says It, including courses for various Adobe products, including Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, and a large number of courses for Microsoft, including a recent new set of courses we've released on StreamSkill and Simon Says It for various Office 365 courses, and many more coming later this year. In addition to that, Dave likes to travel and has traveled to nearly 50 countries. On that note, Dave, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Well, thank you, Simon, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. Very, very excited to usher you into this wonderful world of data analysis and particularly working with pivot tables and data modeling. We actually have a number of different exercise files available for you that you can use either while we're going through the class or certainly afterwards to practice. All right, so if you're ready to go, let's go. One of the first things we're going to talk about is pivot tables. I want to kind of just first define what a pivot table is and sort of what the value of a pivot table is. So a pivot table is an interactive table. And really what it allows you to do is to summarize large bits of data and really kind of take it and kind of tell stories around it, really to be able to do some analysis around what's otherwise kind of like flat and two-dimensional, but be able to kind of cross-reference and see those relationships. Well, ultimately, once it becomes a pivot table, you can organize and group data. You can actually start to sort of see these trends because you start to see these kind of cross-reference relationships between them and ultimately tell stories around your data. Because otherwise, when we get this kind of flat data that's taken in from another external source, we can't really tell stories around it, but pivot tables allow us to do it. So you might be wondering, well, are pivot tables for me? Well, almost everybody who's working with data at all can work with pivot tables. So if you're working with sales reports, you can summarize all the data from product or region, time period, salespeople, whatever you want, you mash it all together, and it allows you to filter it, right, and do all kinds of other wonderful things with calculations, etc. You might be just working with some maybe non-financial data like survey analyses. You can analyze survey responses. You can look at demographics and see how all of those things kind of compare with each other. Maybe you're just working with inventory. You got lots and lots of inventory and you want to just track stock levels by different, products and suppliers, maybe shipping dates, how much things cost, all that good stuff, right? So that's going to be the first place where we're going to start is really just how we can create pivot tables. And then we're going to get into something called data modeling. Right now, data modeling, if we go and get definitions here, a data model is a framework for organizing and structuring, very similar to what we did before, but mostly it's about multiple data sets, right? And it could be any kind of file format. It doesn't have to be Excel. You can bring it in from basic text. If you're working with like SQL, you're working with Oracle, even PDFs, right? You can actually bring it in. As long as it's in a tabular format, you can start to analyze it. And you can have multiple data sets all come together and mashed up. Whereas a pivot table is just going to be one data set. A data model is going to be multiple. And ultimately, this is a really key thing here. We have to find these relationships that exist between the data set. We kind of have to sort of marry them together, right? We're saying, hey, you know this about that other one, so therefore you're going to know all the rest of it based off of all the other ones that are sort of related to them. So if one has the customer ID, another one has the customer ID, but the other one does not have, let's say, state information, the other one does not have the product information, when you marry them together, a data model then occurs. Okay, and you're going to see this is what it's going to kind of look like visually once I show you how you can do it. Okay, now we are going to kind of touch a little bit about on Power Query. I'll kind of briefly go into this. So Power Query is a tool in Excel that simplifies the data modeling. So it allows you to simplify your data modeling process. We're going to get into that. I'm going to show you what that's going to look like, and allows you to streamline the process of what we call preparing and shaping the data. So we're going to be able to kind of take this data before we bring it in to analyze it and do our data model, and we're going to ultimately kind of clean it up, right? I'm just going to give you a brief, quick overview of how we can do that. We're going to see here we have these two different sheets, and I really want to analyze this, right? Because if you look at this, this is just a massive, massive set of data. And again, it's kind of just sort of two-dimensional. And I'd really like to analyze it. I want to sort of organize it. I want to sort of tell stories and see trends around this data. So if we look at it, we can see we have order date, we have product names, we have shippers, we have unit price, company name, just a mountain of data. So what could I do to kind of help make sense of this, to really help me, again, tell stories, analyze it, really break it down and see those relationships? Well, very simply, all I'm going to do is go over to here to insert. And you see I have this option here for pivot table over there in the upper left, right? First choice. I click on that. And first thing they're going to ask me is, well, what's going to be the actual table that we're going to be working with? And I have a table here called grocery, right? I've named that. And then the other question is, well, where do you want to put it? So very simply, I want to create a new pivot table based off of all this grocery data, and I want to put it on a new worksheet. That's great. So then I'm going to go ahead and say, okay. And now I'm ready to start building out my pivot table, because notice here, I have this new sheet 1. So I'm going to very simply name that. I'm going to call this grocery PT. So we know that there's a distinction between this original grocery data and this grocery PT data. Okay, so what this is going to be is my pivot table based off of this grocery data set that's originating from this. So great. So now all I have to do is start building out my pivot table. Now, if you've never used pivot tables, I have good news for you. Essentially, it's an exercise in drag and drop initially, right? It's like, you know what? I don't really know what to do. You don't have to know what to do initially, because you can just drag and drop in one direction, or you can say, listen, if that didn't work, drag and drop in another direction. So if we look over here in the lower right, we have something called values. I'll put that in green here. And then we also have our columns and our rows. I'll put those in blue here. So I put this in green because this is essentially where our numbers typically go, right? Notice how there's a little sigma. So it's going to allow us to do a quick little calculation. So if I scroll down here, you'll notice I have something called extended price. So very easily, I'm just going to drag that here. And right away, my pivot table has begun. Beautiful. And I've got $1.1 million worth of sales here. Lovely. That's great. But does it tell me a story? Not really. So now I can just start building this out with my rows and my columns. So let's just say, for example, I wanted to do some information, let's just say about product name. So I want to know how my products are doing. So it's going to kind of do a deeper dive into what that $1.1 million is. So I just drag this over here, and now boom, just like that, I've got all this great information about my products, okay, and how much we've sold of each of those. But guess what? I can go even deeper, and I can say, hey, you know what? I'd like to know how each company sold each product. So now I can create kind of like a parent-child type of thing, like a heading and a subheading, again, by simply dragging and dropping. But I'm going to drag 2 inside of my rows. I'm going to go over here to company name. And now you can see how it sort of builds it out by a heading and a subheading. Company and product. So my product is Alice Mutton. This is how each company, right, sold how much of that, right? So I have these stores that are selling these products. We scroll down, you can see how it breaks it down in this really, really beautiful way. Now I can continue going here, right? Let's just say I'm concerned about, let's just say city. So I can go ahead and drag city down like that, and you can see, oh, how each city had their own thing here. But what I'm going to do now, because I'm running out of space, I'm going to actually move this little pivot table field out like this, and then make it nice and big like that. I really like doing that. So that allows me to really kind of get a lot of space here. Now what I'd like to do, you know what, is maybe just not work with city anymore. So I'm just going to drag that out. Remember, it's about dragging and dropping. Really nice and easy. Okay, that's great. And you know what? I'm concerned about quantity. So I'm going to bring quantity in here. Okay, great. Now I'm really kind of telling a nice little story here. Now let's go a little bit deeper. What other things we may want to do is I'd like to see this as dollars, because people are getting very kind of confused about this, and they don't know if this is, you know, units. They don't know if it's euros. They don't know anything. So you know what? Very simply, I'm going to convert this number into dollars. So all I do is right click. Now right clicking really goes a long way in PivotTable. So if I right click, notice a lot of options appear, and you can see here, one of them is number format. So I choose that, and then very simply, I'm going to double click on currency, and now boom, it becomes dollars. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Now, let's go ahead and do a couple of other things that I'd really like to see on this, right? And so would my boss. My boss is like, okay, this is actually really good information, but I'd actually like to see these numbers as maybe percentages. Maybe you want to filter out some of this data. Okay, so PivotTables really allows you to do those things quickly and easily. So I have my extended price, as you can see here, these numbers, 27,000, etc., right? All these numbers below it. And these are just like my raw numbers. What I'd really like to do is, again, see them as percentages. So all I do, very simply, is I bring extended price down again. And you see that I'm going to have repeated numbers. But what I'm going to do is make this get converted so it's not showing as the sum of adding up all of these, but as percentages. Because really all I care about is, hey, you know what, my product name, I'd like to know what's the percentage of my grand kind of total of all my sales. So very simply, I right click once again, and you'll see I have this option here for summarize values by and show values as. Summarize values by, it's actually pretty straightforward. In case you're not wanting to sum them, you just want to count them up or average them. That's really neat. But what I'm here for is to show values as, and I'm going to focus on these two right here, or these three, excuse me, my grand total, my column total, and my row total, right? All percentages right there, okay? So once again, you just right click and then show values as, and you can see here is percent of grand total. And you can see that Alice Mutton is 2.3% of all of my grand total of all my sales. Okay, if I were to right click again, say show values as, you can see this is going to be the column total. If I had more than one kind of column and row interspersed with each other, these would be really helpful for me. But this is pretty much the place that most of us are going to start with to be able to know what is the percentage for that particular kind of series. All right. Now, in order to kind of see this a little bit better, because these numbers are not necessarily relevant for me, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to collapse all of my product names into one, so I don't necessarily need to see all my company names. And again, guess what? That's a right click away. I right click, I'm going to come over here to expand collapse, and I'm just going to say collapse entire field. There we go. And now I have all these numbers here, beautiful, and I can see everything I want. Boom, right, that adding up to 100%. Okay, now let's go ahead and sort these. Okay, because that's again going to help me tell my story a lot better. So if I right click here, you're going to see here I have an option to sort. I'm going to say largest to smallest, and then boom, these guys are on top now. Okay, and again, how many times have I right clicked so far and you see the value in that? Let's go ahead and try a different table altogether. Let's go over to here to sports inventory, and possibly a little bit more straightforward, right? Not quite as dizzying, but still a lot of data. And how do we manage this? Okay, and then notice how this has some really good data, and we have product description, we have a store name, region, etc. And we also have, again, our numbers. So once again, I'm going to go over here to insert, pivot table. Okay, and again, this is called sports inventory. And by the way, just so we're clear about how this is even getting this name in here, this is known as a table, right? So this guy right here that I've created is a table. So if I cancel out of this, you'll notice that this is a table design, and this is sports inventory table. So you can very easily create any data and convert it to a table anytime, and then very simply give it a name. Now, why would I make my pivot table be a table first? Well, that allows me to continually add on more data later on, and I can continue to go. Even if it goes up to like 500 or 5,000 rows, the table remains the same. Okay, so it allows it to be kind of like dynamic when it is linking up to the pivot table itself. Okay, so if I go over here to insert, I'm going to say pivot table. There's my sports inventory, new worksheet. Okay, and then boom, there I am. And now, once again, let's go ahead and start off with my unit price. Now, let's say, for example, I accidentally move one of these into the wrong cell, right? I'm going to go ahead and move unit price to rows. And just notice what it did. It's like, oh, that's not exactly what I wanted. So you know what? I'm going to move that out. Let's see if I moved product description into values. I do that. It's like, oh, okay, well, it did do something. It counted how many products I have. And maybe that's exactly what you want. But if you don't want it, just drag it away, kind of toss it into the abyss, and you're good. Okay, so don't worry about making mistakes as you're going through these things. Just like, okay, it's very easily resolved. But sometimes you may find some happy mistakes. You're like, oh, actually, I kind of wanted that after all. I didn't even realize it. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring unit price down here, and I'll bring my product description here. And then you know what? Let's go ahead and work with dates briefly so you can see what this is going to look like. I'm going to bring date right above here inside my rows. And you'll notice here that even though like all my dates, if you look back over here, were all individual dates like this, it automatically grouped it for me by years, by quarters, months, etc. Now, which is pretty awesome, but not exactly always what I want. Okay, so if you want to control how your dates are grouped, meaning let's say I only care about months, I don't really care about quarters, right? Or even these individual days, what we're going to do is we're going to jump over to here to our pivot table analyze right here. Because notice how we have this new contextual tab, okay? And you'll also notice that once I click on any of these dates, I now have this section to click on called group field, okay? And guess what groups are going to be available there? And then also notice the range that it's showing me here too. So you know what? I don't really care about quarters. That's great. So then I just click on that. It goes away. I click OK. And now look at that. That's way nicer to read. Very cool. Love that. Maybe I don't care about months, right? Same deal. I come back to it and all I got to do is uncheck months right there. And it's going to come right to maybe a view that I care more about. Okay. We're going to talk about filtering, and also I want to talk about slicing. Okay, so this is a large set of data, and I only really care about certain bits of data. So I may want to filter by this data here. So filtering is pretty straightforward. You can see I have this little filter data, this filter drop down, and then very easily I can say, you know what, I'm only really concerned with these guys here, right? I click OK, and then bam, it's filtered out, right? No big deal, nothing too fancy. You've probably done this in a lot of your other exercises, but you can see how nice and easy that is, okay? Helping me tell my story. Now, another kind of parallel to that is working with something called slicers. And a slicer allows you to do the same thing as we just did with filtering, but do it a little more kind of interactively, right? A little more visually, a little bit more kind of gamified. So if I say insert slicer now, again, here I am in my pivot table analyze tab, insert slicer. You're going to see here, it gives me all of my column headings that I started with, asking me, hey, what would you like to filter by? Right? So I like to filter by product name, right? So I can very easily do that. But you know what? I can even filter by other things that are not on my pivot table fields here, right? So pretty easily, if I wanted to and kind of get a different story there, I easily could do that. So I do that, and then bam, guess what's going to pop up? Make this a little bit wider, maybe a little bit taller. And you can see here is all of them right there, right? So you can say, okay, only show me that, only show me that. So just note how kind of easy that is for me to just click away to see exactly what I want, rather than having to go to some drop-down menu, etc. Okay. Now, the slicer has additional sets of options, just like how our pivot table did, called the slicer tab right up on top here. And I certainly could change the color if I want to. Right? I could even add on additional columns to make this a little bit kind of better screen real estate by making it so I can kind of see everything, right? That's pretty neat. I like that. And if I wanted to do multi-select, I can simply come back to the slicer itself and just start going crazy just like that. These are all my stores, very easily accessible, beautiful. Love that.
Hi, from everyone at Simon Says It. We hope you're enjoying this training lesson. Please like this video to show your support for the channel. If you want to take your learning further, earn a certificate for this course, and gain access to over 200 courses ad-free, click up there and go to simonsaysit.com. Thanks for watching, and back to the course.
So now let's transition into data modeling. So if we look at the data that we're going to be starting with for data modeling, we actually have 3 different data sets we want to kind of merge together. We have product, right? If you notice, we have all these here, and just notice some of the columns that we have here, right? Our product ID, category, subcategory, etc. Orders, which also has some information up on top, including product ID. And then we also have customers, which has customer ID, etc., all this. Now, it's important to make sure that before you start working with your data for data modeling, you have some type of potential for what we call relationships, okay? So I have customer, and this has a customer ID. And look at my orders, that also has some information here, right? Order ID, and oh, look at that, customer ID. So these guys are going to be buddies. Now, product does not have customer ID, right? But it does have product ID. But guess who else has product ID? Is orders, okay? And you can see there is my product ID. So we are going to be creating relationships around all three of those data so they can be merged together as one to be able to bring them all together into one pivot table. Okay, with the pivot table we did earlier, which is one data set, we're going to actually bring all of these things in here, and we're going to use a multitude of tools to be able to do that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just start off with a blank data set here. And what I'm going to do is use my data tab to very simply get data. Right? Notice it says here, get and transform data, just like how we talked about earlier with data modeling. So when you're getting data, you can get data from a lot of different types of file sources, like text, from the web, right? You click on get data, you can see here from file, even from PDFs and some of these other ones like XML, all this stuff. For our purposes, just going to be an Excel format, but certainly you have the option to do it from all kinds of other platforms. So I'm going to go ahead and go to that first. And then you're going to see here, I'm going to go right to my first data source, which is going to be customers. And when I say import, you're going to notice that this new little toolbar is going to pop up, or this dialog box is going to pop up. And you'll see here is my customer table, right? Boom, there it is, the sheet that I have there. And we're going to take a look at all these options that I have here to show my table here, right? Now, underneath here, you're going to see that I have the option to load the data, and that'll load it into Excel to go right away. I can transform the data, which is going to take me to a different program altogether, okay? Or I can just cancel it altogether. So you know what? I'm going to actually transform this. I want you to see what this looks like when it takes us into how we're going to be able to transform the data into the Power Query editor. So now this is going to pop up, and believe it or not, we're in this sort of like adjacent type of program, right? And I'll just show you here. I'm now in the Power Query editor. That happens automatically, right? And all of us should have access to this, right? It should automatically bring it up for us. Now, why am I here? Well, I may want to kind of transform the data, say, hey, listen, you know what? Some of this was maybe not right. And you know what? I found one that now I can go into this and I can now make it right. Well, what's wrong with this data? Oh, it's missing some zeros here, right? Maybe you don't want some of these columns, right? You can very easily just simply right click and remove them, right? There's all kinds of different options you have here to be able to kind of make the data ready for your different analysis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this zip code from 123, because it thinks that this is just a regular number, by clicking on the 123. Notice I'm literally clicking on that 123 with my left click, and I'm just going to make this text. Okay, and then you see a little pop-up. It's going to ask me, do you want to replace current? You want to add new step? I'm going to go and replace the current step, basically saying, hey, you know what? These are all your steps that you're working with here. As you kind of progress through Power Query, new steps now appear here, and I don't really need to make a new one, so I just added on that one to replace that, and now you can see it fixed it. Okay, now I could also say, you know what? I don't really work with other countries, so I can very easily even just remove this column, and then it's not going to show up when I finally load it into Excel. Okay, so that's just kind of the high level of how we may want to work with Power Query. Now, I need to bring it back into Excel. So we're going to go over to here to this close and load. And then I'm going to choose this other one here that says close and load to, because I actually want to get some extra options. And we're going to see here that it says here, select how you want to view this data in your workbook. Do you want to view as a table, pivot table report, etc.? And you know what? For my purposes, I only want to create a connection. And most importantly here, I want to add this data to the data model. Okay, so basically, if you think about what it's asking you here when you check that, is you're going to pair this up with other data sets, right? So I definitely want to choose this one. And only creating connection is just making it so I don't really see any other data here. I don't really need to see it as a table. I don't need to see it kind of lingering about. I only want the connection. Okay. All right. So go ahead and do that again. We'll get a nice little review there. Okay. So there's my customers. Okay. Click on that and then transform. And we're going to do this 2 more times, by the way. Okay. So I'll fix that, make that text. Okay. Replace current. And then I'm going to remove the country. Okay, boom, there we have it. And then one more time, close and load to. And then you can see here, only create the connection, add this data to the data model. So now you can see there is my connection with my customers. Let's go ahead and do that again. So get data from file, Excel, and then I'm going to bring in my orders. And you can see there's my orders. You can see it all right there. And you have the option now to kind of skip this if you want to entirely, but I'm going to transform it one more time. It's going to take me one more time to my Power Query editor, right? It seems a little bit weird, I know, but we're going to go over to here. I'm going to notice something kind of weird about this data because I have these shipping costs. And for some reason, my data source kind of brought in these numbers as 4 decimals here, right? Kind of weird here. Also my profit. So very simply, I'm going to convert that into currency. It doesn't put the dollar signs on there, but it does convert it to look like currency, right? We can do all that stuff in Excel. Do the same thing here, my 1.2, convert that to currency, replace current. Beautiful, that looks great. And then once again, same exact process, close and load to, create only connection, add this data to the data model. Cool, now I have these 2 guys who are waiting to get kind of match made, right? Okay, awesome. Now let's go ahead and do the 3rd one. And this one we're going to do a little faster because you know what? Maybe you don't need to do any transformation. So if I go over here to products, right? This time I'm noticing that everything actually looks pretty good. I don't really need to change anything. I don't need to transform this. But before I just go and click on load, I want to see what's living right underneath here. So if I click on this little drop down, we have this option to load to. Okay, well, when I click on that, it's going to give me those same options that I saw before. Okay, you can see, there it is. Okay, but it's not taking me into Power Query necessarily. So I'm going to say only create connection, add this to the data model. Okay, and then very simply, I click OK. Now, these are all part of my potential data model, right? That's all kind of connected there, ready to be made into a relationship. Just imagine we're kind of matchmakers. They're all in the same room, but they're still strangers, right? We haven't introduced them to say, hey, you know what? You guys have mutual friends. So since you have mutual friends, you can be friends with each other, okay? So this is where the relationship part comes in, okay? So we need to actually make these relatable because if I try to do a pivot table right now, it will not work. It will be confused because the relationship have not been officially established, okay? So this is the part, I just have to say, that is not available for the Mac, right? For some reason, they have not created this, okay? But you can do most of these things here, but in terms of the relationships, right, it's not available on the Mac version of Excel. I have 2 ways that I can now work with creating my relationships. Notice over here, I have this data tools, and I have this little icon right there. I click on that, and you can see here is this manage data model. So when I click on that, that actually takes me into something called Power Pivot, okay? And the easiest way for me to actually create the relationship is going over here to diagram view. But I'm going to show you a couple of things here. Number 1, here's diagram view. And number 2, way down below, notice I have all 3 of those tables that I actually brought in are all available for me. That's great. Okay. But this diagram view is now going to allow me to start making those relationships. So earlier on in my slide deck, I showed you kind of like a table that looked like this, where we can start creating our relationships, okay? So let me go ahead and make this a little bit taller, make sure we see everything. And we have to make the relationships occur between the sort of similar or really the exact match of all of these columns, okay? So notice here I have customer ID. Hey, meet customer ID. That's amazing. So this again is going to be a nice little simple drag and drop. Say, hey, you know what? Good. That's great. Let's go ahead and how about this one? Product ID, meet product ID. Oh, great. Now keep in mind, they don't have to have the same exact name. It just has to be the same exact data. Okay. This could be called, you know, like product ID 2025 or something like that, or something that's kind of more customary and proprietary for you. Okay. Now, if we look at these numbers here, when I hover over it, notice it shows me what it is right there. Boom, customer ID to customer ID. Okay. Now this says one, and then if you can see this here, there's a little asterisk here. This is a one-to-many relationship. Okay. I have one customer that can have many orders. I have one product, this is my product database, and here's my orders that can have more than one order, right? So many people are ordering and many products are being ordered, okay, of the same exact product, okay? That's great. Now, I've established the relationship. That is what Excel needs, okay? So if you look over here in the far, far upper left, there's this little Excel logo. That's going to allow me to go right back to Excel. Come back here, and nothing really fancy happens, right? They don't give you any applause. There's no fireworks, no nothing, right? And you can see, bam, we have that ready to go, okay? Now, I will tell you one thing before we create our pivot table, okay? Those of us who would like to, you could also put on this Power Pivot extra tab that I have here. Again, this is just for PC users, okay? If I click on that, notice this is going to allow me to have a bigger option here and a few other kind of more advanced options. If you wanted to do that, I've created a whole deck that shows you the breakdown of this. But if you go over here to File and then Options, and you can see that there's these add-ins, okay? Now the add-in that I have here is this Power Pivot for Excel. If you want to get it, you just have to go over here to this little drop-down to the COM add-ins, click on Go, and then boom, you're going to see there's this Power Pivot. Now, everybody should have access to this. It's totally free. You should be fine, right? Again, everybody meaning everybody on a PC. Okay, so now here comes the moment of truth, okay? Because we have all this data, right? We've added to the data model, and then we're able to create relationships between all that data. So now let's go ahead and do a pivot table on this, okay? So if I go over to here to Insert, this time I'm going to click on the drop down for pivot table, and then notice here's this option for from data model. Okay, see that? From the data model that I created. So I choose that, and now it's going to ask me, okay, well, where would you like to put this? Okay, I'm going to say new worksheet. And now I want you to notice what's occurring over here on the right-hand side. All three of my tables are now available. So this time I'm definitely going to make this nice and big so we can kind of see what we're working with here. Okay, and what I want you to notice is that all of them now have a seat at the table, so to speak. Okay, you can see, all right, look at that. So everybody can be represented. So let's now go ahead and see what we have here. Well, I'm concerned about, let's just say states. So I'll bring states over here. Great, all my states are here. And then these guys, the customer table, didn't really know anything about orders at any point, but now they can be friends. So now let's go ahead and go over here to sales. Now they have kind of merged and meshed together because of that data modeling and that relationship. Okay, and then just for fun, I'll go ahead and bring in profit, just the same, and customers are like, and states are like, oh, that's great. I love all that. Okay, cool. And now let's go ahead and maybe bring in, I don't know, product name. Okay, I'll just go ahead and bring that down, and then beautiful. Now we have something very powerful to give us lots and lots of information and help tell our stories. Okay, and of course we can keep going on and on and on here. Bam, bam, okay, great, move this around. Everything that we learned in our pivot tables can now be applied, all right? But how we get to this place is a little bit more kind of circuitous, right? It does kind of involve a little bit more sort of, getting things kind of married to each other, creating that data model, right? And then ultimately creating the relationship between them, okay? Now we can see here's all our information right up here. Now I'm going to go ahead and bring this back over here, and now let's just kind of bask in this, right? This is amazing. 3 different data sets are now talking to each other. Now, earlier, I showed you how we can convert some of these to dollars. Well, you know what? This is not dollars, so let's very easily fix that. Right-click, number format, currency, beautiful, and there we have it. That's good to go. Love that. And if I wanted to collapse any of these, let's go ahead and collapse it by this category, right? I'm going to right-click on that, and you can see it's my option to expand collapse, and I'm going to say collapse entire field. Beautiful. Okay, so you can see, again, how I can kind of tell my stories, but way, way more sort of sophisticated. Now, one thing you may have noticed that I'm missing some data up here, right? And if I expand everybody out, let's go and expand entire field, right? I'm even missing data here, right? That's kind of weird because I wouldn't mind actually seeing kind of like the math around this stuff and see my totals. And more specifically, I want to see my subtotals, okay? So how do I do that? Well, we're going to jump over to a new tab here. Outside of my PivotTable Analyze, there is something called Design. Okay, and the Design has a whole bunch of options here ready for us to sort of display and present and really think about it like reporting and reporting your content, right, in a way that's going to be a little more beneficial for you, for your data, and certainly for your audience. So I'm going to go over to here to the subtotals section. And then you can see here it says, do not show subtotals, show all subtotals at the bottom of the group, show all subtotals at the top of the group. I want to see it at the top for right now. I choose that, and then, oh, how amazing is that? Brilliant. So now I have all the data that was not there before for some reason. Now it's easily retrievable, okay? Really, really nice. Now, all the other stuff that I might want to do in terms of filtering and doing all this good stuff, I can very, very easily do with this. So I come back over to here. Here's my slicers. Here's all my other good stuff here. Here's my ability to filter. Okay, if I right-click, here's all my ability to sort. Pretty much everything we've covered working with our pivot tables is available here. Okay, now you may want to do a few more kind of like design-oriented things. So what we could do now is we can do a completely different pivot table, but based off of the same data. Okay, so if I wanted to, I can do it side by side from right here. I could do it on a completely different sheet if I want to, but understand that many people, when they are working with pivot tables, they have kind of what we call a dashboard, right? Like the dashboard can sort of be built out to be able to have more than one sort of story on the same workbook, okay? So if I go back over to here to insert, and then guess what? Pivot table, data model. And then you can see I'm going to say existing workbook, and I'm going to put it right here, right? It's like, okay, great. Yeah, put it right there. So we can kind of have a little sort of side-by-side story around this. Yeah, that's amazing. So I'll go over to here to my orders. And then once again, remember here is my sales. So boom, I'll bring that in. That's good to have that number right there. And then I'll go over here to my products. And then maybe I'm only really concerned about my categories and product names at this point. So let's bring product name here. Boom. Okay. And then category. Let's maybe bring that up. Okay. Cool. And that's really all I care about for this bit of data set, right? Or maybe I don't. Maybe it's only going to be, boom, just on these guys here. And that's going to be a very, very simple story that I tell. And I can have them side by side. It's the same data set, and I can work with that very quickly and easily. So I'll go ahead and right click on that. I'm going to go ahead and do number format, and then I'll say currency. The thing I want you to understand that's so critical about what we're working with here, since we have so much data, our original data still exists kind of elsewhere, right? So if I wanted to kind of change some of this data, if we look over here on the right-hand side, I have two little tabs available to me, okay? This is the one I'm currently working with, which is my pivot table. If I click on this one, guess what's waiting here, right? My original data that I started with. Okay, so let's just go over here to, let's just say, orders, right? If I right click on this, notice all these options that are here, including the option to edit the data. And then earlier you saw me delete it, right? Because there was that extra one that came in, right? And anything else you want to do, maybe it's not coming in, automatically. If somebody else is editing the data, you can refresh it. Okay, what we're going to do now is edit it. And guess where that's going to take us to? I click on edit. It's going to take us back to the Power Query editor that we started with. And not only that, it has all 3 of the queries sitting there for me to be able to edit anytime, right? Any of these things I might want to do that, okay? So let's just say, for example, I notice, one of those, this is incorrect, right? It shouldn't say subcategory, or at least with a capital C. I'll just make it like that, sub, and I'll just do like that with a hyphen, right? Easy to remember that. Great, okay? And then we can see any of these things. Maybe I want to call this instead of product name, product title, something like that, okay? And you can see, all right, great, easy to work with, beautiful, okay? And then any of the other, types of labeling or formatting, or you can make those changes right from here. And guess what? Even if you were planning to do what's called a calculated field, right? You can do a calculated field from here, right? So if you wanted to, let's say you wanted to multiply unit price by quantity, you can do all that stuff from here, because notice there's this add column. And then from here, you can actually do it as a custom column. Okay, so if I go to, for example, let me just briefly go over this here. Let's just go over to here to, we have these numbers here. Okay, and in Excel right now, it's not going to let me to kind of do a calculation, but here I can do a calculation. So now we're getting to maybe a little bit more advanced stuff. So we can actually see, hey, you know what? We can actually do more than just organize our data. We can start to do some pretty nifty calculations, right? And let's just say, I'm kind of making this up here, but let's just say I really wanted to know about the quantity times the sales to be able to really give me a number that I couldn't have ordinarily, okay? So what we're going to do next is I'm going to go over here. Remember, I'm inside Power Query. I'm going to go over here to Add Column, and then notice here is Custom Column, okay? So I choose that, and now this new dialog box pops up. And it's going to very simply give me a new column name. I'm going to call this total sales, right? Whatever. Okay. And maybe you can't see it from where you're at, but it's waiting for me right there with this little equal sign, implying that it wants it to be a formula. Okay. Boom. I can very easily do that. And now I'm just going to multiply, let's just say, quantity times sales. Okay. So all I do now is double click on that. That's going to come in. And I'm going to say multiplied by, and then again, double click and make that sales. So if you can see, there it is, a little asterisk there, boom, boom. Okay. And now I'm going to have a new column now that exists over here. Beautiful. Okay. And let's make that. So it's going to be currency. And then I can move this in whatever order I want to as well, right? So that actually makes a little more sense to have this over here. Just simply click and drag it. Okay, so I've now kind of changed the source of this data. Okay, so I'm going to come back to home, and then very simply, I'm going to close and load, right? So I'm going to very simply click on that, and then you're going to see how it's kind of refreshing. So what we want to see now, okay, is that inside of my, I believe I put it into my orders, right? We should now have the total sales. Okay, so now I can add that in to this data set here. Okay, so if I go over to here, you can see now my total sales can now be brought in to here that didn't exist before. Okay, so if I right click now, go ahead and make that into a number format, go to currency, boom, now I have everything I need. And you know what? I don't need these. And now I have a set of data that I did not have before. Okay, because that total sales didn't exist before. And if we look at the other thing that I changed, which was my subcategory, okay, we'll go over to here. Notice there's my subcategory. That changed also, right, with my little hyphen. You can see how nice and easy that is to have it all sort of connected to each other. So once you create that relationship, once you create that data model, and you're in Power Query, and then you bring it into Excel, you're not completely disjointed, right? You can always come back and you can make those changes there. But I think it's important for us to kind of do a little review of how we even started to begin with, right? And I'll go over this relatively quickly, but how we started is we went over here to data and get data. And we got each of these individual ones one by one, right? And we brought them in, right? And we can see here when we bring it in, it allows us to do what we call a transformation if necessary, right? That transformation for a lot of us, this could be completely optional. You don't need to transform it because it looks beautiful. It's perfect. Maybe you do some of the transformation in Excel. It's totally fine, right? If it needs it, it is recommended that you do use Power Query. And then we finally loaded it, or we loaded it and we said load to. And then remember, we had the option to now do what, right? Only create the connection and then, very important, add this to the data model. Okay. And then we did that 3 times. And then after that, it was available here inside of our queries and connections, which came in automatically, right? As we did them one by one. And then what did we do after that? We had to create the data model, wait for it, the relationship, okay? That is really the key thing. These guys don't know each other. So if you remember, they're all kind of sitting like wallflowers in the same room, waiting for somebody to introduce one to the other, okay? And that part is a little bit kind of hiding. It's inside of the data tab. And then you'll see here, should be this option here under data tools. And then when you choose that, you'll see there's this option for relationships, or you can go over here to manage data model. Okay, and then once I did that, that took me to Power Query. And then I was able to make the relationships by dragging and dropping all of the kind of relative categories, right, from one to the other.
Well, congratulations everyone for completing this course. So hope you enjoyed this class, hope you learned a lot, and we look forward to seeing you in future lessons. Thanks everyone.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see the full course that this video came from, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Says It.